Hey y'all, this is Dr. LaLa. Welcome back to another episode of the RE3Volve Podcast, where believers meet at the intersection of grief, loss, and transition to explore how faith helps along the way, because grief and loss are a journey and not a final destination. So how y'all doing? I'm so excited to be here today. Even though today is a heavy topic, I'm excited to be here because the RE3Volve Podcast is a year old. I can hardly believe it. The RE3Volve Podcast is a year old. And I consider myself blessed to be here, to have been blessed to be a part of BGTV Studios, and everyone that I've met along the way, to be able to have these conversations about grief and loss and transition. I'm truly blessed to be here. And so I'm so thankful to have this opportunity. And, we're talking about grief and loss and transition. There comes a time when things begin to shift, right? On every journey, at some point, things shift, your grief evolves, and things change a little bit, right? You change, the way you see life changes, and the reality is, it's not because the pain went away, it's not because it got easier, but because you become different, right? And so over time, we stop explaining ourselves. We stop explaining why we feel the way we do. We stop defending our healing journey. We stop doing that. We stop justifying the ways that grief changes us. We stop justifying those things, right? And so this is the moment where our healing becomes personal. It becomes your own. And you begin to see yourself in a new way. Because the truth is, grief and loss and transitions, they do change you. And that's okay. That's okay. It's to be expected. And so let's start this conversation with how grief evolves. What does that evolution look like? Because grief isn't just a single moment in time, right? Grief is like a landscape. And what do we know about landscapes? Landscapes change as seasons change. Because we have the way we feel and the way we think and our behaviors in early grief. And that changes as time goes on. Early grief, a lot of times, is loud, it's disruptive. Our pain is on display. A lot of times, we are carrying how we're feeling and what we're going through. We carry it on our faces. Folks carry it in their posture. And that varies. Some people are very angry, while other folks are very sad and they go into themselves. And so that journey looks different for everyone. But as grief evolves, it tends to shift a little bit. And so these things that were once written on your face, that were once carried in your posture, now it's a bit more internalized. And so people can't necessarily see what's going on. But just because people can't see the grief anymore, and let me say this, sometimes it's not so much as people don't see, right? Sometimes it's because after the funeral is over, after the repast, everyone else has gone back to their regularly scheduled program. And it's not that people don't care. I want to make sure I say that. It's not that people don't care, but the reality is your life changed. You lost someone. You lost a job. You got divorced. You're struggling with infertility. And so it's not that folks don't care, but folks go back to the things that they are most concerned about. And sometimes that looks like you may no longer be on the top of their priority list. But again, it's not that they don't care. I want to stress that. It's not. But this is your journey, right? And so it's important that we recognize that. In this season, it's also important that we set boundaries. They're necessary for your emotional safety. Because when we're grieving, whatever we're grieving about, emotions run the entire spectrum. There may be times when you're angry, when you're sad, and you're laughing, all in a 15-minute window of time. And some people can't handle that. It's hard. A lot of folks don't know what to do with emotions, with anything other than happiness. A lot of folks don't know what to do with that, right? And here's another truth. A lot of us can't handle our own emotions, never mind helping someone else handle theirs, right? So we have to give the people who are in our community, we have to give them grace for that, because it's hard sometimes being able to support someone when they're going through such a tumultuous time, right? And this grief and loss and transition journey is deeply personal, because again, it's yours. And you're the one who's directly impacted by whatever it is that you're going through. And so this evolution isn't necessarily about you getting stronger. And sometimes strength does happen. A lot of times you do realize just how strong you really are. You may find reserves you didn't even know you had. But really, this season is about getting clarity. It's about being clear. It's about being clearer about what truly matters. There is little more than losing someone that really makes you stop and consider what matters. Because when you lose someone, you know, the little things don't matter so much. They really don't. It's about being clearer about boundaries and what harms, who brings negativity to your life, who isn't able to be supportive, who isn't capable of coming into your space and support you without directing the conversation back to themselves. It's about being clear about what you no longer have to justify, because you don't owe anyone an explanation about why someone's been gone a year and your heart still aches. Because some people have spent more of their lives with their partner than apart. I can remember when my mom, after the accident, right? Mommy had amnesia. But the one thing that remained consistent, she didn't know who any of us were. She didn't know me, my brothers, my sisters. She didn't know her grands. But the one thing that remained consistent throughout the entire situation is she would ask, "Where's Daddy?" She didn't remember anything else, but she would ask, "Where's Daddy?" Every single time she would ask, "Where's Daddy?" After she came out, when she woke up from the coma, her first question was, "Where's Daddy?" Now, we didn't tell her for weeks that Daddy didn't survive the accident. Weeks after she woke up, We didn't tell her because we didn't want to risk her declining once she realized that daddy wasn't there. Because now imagine, she and my daddy had been together since she was 12. They had been together like 40 some odd years. And when she went to sleep, it was the night before her birthday. So when she woke up, she thought it was her birthday. And she and daddy were supposed to be going to Florida to visit my baby brother. So imagine someone being with someone for 40 something years and then all of a sudden they're no longer here and you have absolutely no recollection. And my mom grieved my daddy that entire 5 years before her passing. And I'm sure there were folks who didn't quite understand, right? Because Elder Cook's been gone 5 years. But she would still cry herself to sleep. There were nights when she still cried herself to sleep. There were days when we would just be sitting, watching TV or having a cup of coffee, and out of the blue, she would say, "I miss Daddy." And so I'm saying all of that to say there is no time limit on grief. We don't know the cost of the love that they shared, what losing them cost. And so there is no time limit on that. So don't feel as though you have to rush the process, because it's truly a process, and grief isn't linear. We go in and out of the different phases of grief: bargaining, anger, depression, shock. We go in and out of the different phases as time goes on. And it truly is a process. So you have to be gentle with yourself. And if you're supporting someone on a grief journey, be gentle with those folks. Because it may not make sense to you, but the reality is we never know what people are going through. The role that a person may have played in someone's life. What losing a job may look like for them. How that's going to impact their family, their future. And so on this journey, we can expect an evolution. And the goal is to shift from survival, because when grief first happens, when loss and transition first happen, we go into survival mode. We do. But the goal is not to stay in fight or flight. Right? It's about seeking clarity. It's about being able to honor yourself on the journey. No more justifying where you are. No more shrinking from your emotional truth. Be honest with yourself about where you are. If you're not okay, be honest with yourself about not being okay. Because no matter how far you run, no matter how fast you run, you're always going to be with yourself. You're always going to be right there when you stop to get your breath. And so you may as well face it and look it in its face. No more defending the pace at which you're healing. Slow and steady is the goal. Slow and steady. This is a marathon, right? And no more performing strength. And let's sit with that for just a second. No more pretending to be strong. And now, of course, I'm not telling you to just fall apart at the Walmart. You know, that's not what I'm saying. But you don't have to pretend to be okay so that others are comfortable. You're allowed to feel how you feel. You're allowed to have emotions. You're allowed to have feelings. And you're allowed to be there. Right? And sometimes in this evolution, that looks like having to set boundaries. That might look like having to refuse to take part in a conversation that minimizes your emotions, that minimizes your grief. It's okay for you to tell someone who says to you, well, you should be over it by now. It's okay to tell them that, I'm going to step away from this conversation. It's okay for you to tell them that. You don't have to stand and participate in that. It's okay to choose silence rather than explaining yourself. Because again, you don't owe anybody an explanation, right? It's okay for you to grieve privately without apology. Your grief doesn't have to be on display. Because I've even heard of situations where people feel like someone wasn't grieving enough. But the reality is, you don't know what someone's been through. Sometimes folks experience a sense of relief. Sometimes people are set free because everyone lives different lives. And the truth is, you have no idea what goes on behind closed doors. You have no idea. There is a Tyler Perry movie, and in the movie, the children are upset with their mom because she's not grieving their father in the way that they think she should. They're actually quite angry with her. And if I can remember the movie, if I can find it, I'll share it in one of the comments. But they're angry with her because she's not grieving in the way that they think that she should after their dad passes away. But what they don't know is their dad was a serial cheater. He cheated on her the entire duration of their marriage. And as a matter of fact, the day he died at a hotel with his mistress. So they were angry with her because she wasn't grieving the way they thought that she should. But what they didn't know is that she finally was free. Because the reason she stayed with him, despite his serial cheating, despite the emotional, the financial, the verbal abuse, she stayed so that she would be able to take care of them. So now, no. She wasn't sad. But her life had been a living hell for 30, 40 years. So now she was free. She was no longer living a life of disrespect, of hurt, dishonor. And so just because someone isn't grieving in the way you think they should, it may just be that you don't know the story. You don't know their testimony. You don't know the life they've lived. Because those children had no idea that their dad was the person that he was until he died. Because their mother protected him. And so we have to be careful about judging how people grieve. Because again, you never know what they've been through to put them in that space. Because that lady felt like she could finally breathe. She had been suffocating for 30, 40 years. And now she could breathe again, right? And so now she can heal and do it publicly without apology. And sometimes that's what it looks like. You're allowed to heal without apology. Now, this lady from this Tyler Perry movie that I'm talking about, I imagine she healed publicly and loudly. Because no one knew what her life had been like. They lived like the idyllic life. People had no idea. Some of the older folks did, but her children certainly didn't. So now she's able to live and go be happy. And you're allowed to do that. And this is where we can choose how we allow grief to affect us. We say this often, grief has the capacity to make you bitter, or it can make you better. Because grief absolutely changes us, and that's why it's important that we learn how to grieve well. And as grief evolves, it becomes less about what happened and more about what we're learning from this experience, how it shares it, how it shapes us. A lot of times we get emotional clarity. We get spiritually grounded. We get more solid in our faith. Certainly during this time, we begin to learn how to set relational boundaries, because there may come a time when there are certain people that you just cannot engage with for your mental health and theirs as well, right? We allow ourselves to heal at our own pace. We give ourselves permission to feel how we're feeling when we feel that way. And then we become aware of the legacy, not just what was lost, but also what remains. What can come from this? Because we're not trying to erase grief, but grief absolutely becomes a part of the tapestry in our lives, right? Because it doesn't become our identity, but it absolutely becomes a part of the tapestry. And this is where we get wisdom and discernment. A lot of times we're able to have more compassion for folks. Sometimes this is where we find our purpose. So this is the year where we stop explaining and we start becoming. And grief is something that shapes us. And our faith is something that anchors us during the evolution. Because our faith gives us language and reassurance during this evolution. It gives us a framework for transformation. And I think one of the most significant things about our faith is that it doesn't ask us to minimize our feelings. God doesn't ask us not to have our feelings. He doesn't ask that of us. Psalms 34:18 says that the Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit. So when we are in this season of brokenness, God is right there with us. His closeness is restorative. In him, we're allowed to evolve without shame. We don't have to be afraid. We don't have to feel pressured to go through the process. He allows us to sit at his feet. This is a place where our grieving hearts can rest. That's the part our faith plays in this, right? Our faith is the structure for the evolution. And then therapy gives us the tools. It helps with emotional regulation. It gives us language for those complex feelings that we feel, because a lot of times we need help just figuring out what these feelings are. In therapy is where you can find validation for the fact that grief isn't a linear process. This is where you can learn as you're going in and out of the different phases of grief. No one is expecting you to show up perfect in therapy. This is where we learn how to navigate triggers. Because remember, triggers are our responsibility. It's no one else's job to manage my triggers. It's mine. And so in therapy is where we learn how to do that. This is also where we get support and language for setting boundaries. Because again, boundaries don't govern how other folks act. Boundaries govern how I act. Those are for me. This is also where you can feel guilt and anger and confusion and give voice to it without shame or fear of judgment. This is where you can get guidance for how to make grief, this grief that you're feeling, guidance about how it fits into the tapestry of your life without consuming you. Because grief is a part of the story. It's not the story, right? Therapy helps us to understand what we're going through. And in therapy is where we can learn how to stop defending it, this grief journey, and start owning it. Because love it or hate it, it's a part of the journey. And it's your decision how it will affect you. Will it make you bitter or will it make you better? And so as we close, there is a shift that happens as the grieving heart stops explaining itself, as our grief evolves. In this evolution, grief becomes wisdom, that healing becomes personal. Because again, this grief, loss, and transition journey, it is all yours. Who you are becoming becomes clearer, and explanations are no longer required, because your healing journey is your own. And so as I close, I just want to remind you that there is no time limit on grief. Again, there is no time limit on grief. Some days it may be a butterfly that flitters across your face. And other days it may be an elephant sitting in your chest. Whatever stage you're in, you're allowed to feel that way without apology. And so until next time, keep choosing healing. Keep choosing joy. I love y'all. Bye.